Hi, I'm Alan Parker, and I'm a professor at Southern Adventist University, and I'm excited to share with you today a result of a survey that I conducted among former young adult Adventists. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about that time period. It's such an exciting time period for a young person. You're deciding what you're going to do, you're deciding who you're going to marry, you're maybe building a family, you're reinventing ideas, your mind is expanding, your social network is expanding. But as a result of that, there's also some deconstruction. Why do I believe what I believe? Is this even relevant to my life? Is this a faith community that I want to be part of? And unsurprisingly, a number of people decide that they no longer want to be part of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. So we're doing something new. We're doing a Slido, sli.do, and you can participate by putting in the number 222702, and you'll be able to answer some of the questions that I'm putting out there. And so my first question is, what percentage of young people leave the church? Now we know that for the average Seventh-day Adventist, 40% of Seventh-day Adventists end up leaving the faith. But what is that for young people? And you know what the statistic is in North America, based on some of the studies I've seen? 70%. That's 7 out of 10. This is not just a lost sheep, 1 in 100. This is 70 out of 100. This is not a lost sheep. This is a lost flock. An entire generation is being lost. Now, they may be on the books, but that doesn't mean they're in the pews. And if you look at most churches, you'll discover that the missing age group is between 18 and 35. So when I was in London, I was on the underground, and I noticed when I got off the train that there would be this voice that says, "Mind the gap, mind the gap." And what it meant was there was a gap next to the train you had to be careful not to fall into. Well, is there a gap in the Seventh-day Adventist Church that young adults are falling into? And can we mind that gap to make sure that we lose less young people? So in the survey that I did of former Adventists, those who are no longer attending church, nearly half of my respondents were under the age of 35, which is just unusual for most surveys. You don't get that high of a response from that age group. It means that they're invested in this. I had over 700 responses, and not only did I have about half from under the age of 35, but the next up age group, 35 to 44, I had about 25%. So almost 75% were under the age of 45. And I wanted to know, why did you leave the church? These were people no longer in church. Why did you leave? Now, this survey is going to be different from the results that you've heard from the general worldwide survey, because this was North America and it was mainly young adults. And so some of the reasons why you've heard why people leave are going to be shown up to be different here. So why do people leave the church? That's Slido 222702. Put in your answer. And here was my surprising finding. I found that most young adults left because of doctrinal disagreements. That may not be true for others, but for young adults, they're saying, I don't agree with the doctrines of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, there may be other reasons why they left, but this was one of the primary reasons. Over 50% said that they left because of doctrinal reasons. The second reason was hypocrisy of church members. They just found the church judgmental. They also said it was boring, that they felt that they didn't get support. They said maybe there was an abuse situation that went on that caused them to leave. Only after all of these reasons do we get to relationship conflict, which was what was indicated in the worldwide Adventist Church survey on former members. So here, young adults are telling us how I think is important to me, how people relate to me and whether they have integrity is important to me. Is there abuse and how is it handled? That's important to me. And these are issues we must deal with young adults. In fact, I want to suggest to you 4 ways in which we can mind the gap, 4 ways in which we can prevent young adults from falling through the gaps based on this survey that I conducted. And the first way is what I call the rationality gap. We have struggled to make our beliefs rational. What one young person wrote was, I am finding cognitive dissonance. Once you escape the cave, these are their words, and learn what the shadows really are, you can't be talked back into the cave. Another young person said, I have become an atheist. Over the course of 3 years or so, I have considered arguments and evidence from both sides and decided through great pain and anxiety, because I'm going to lose some relationships, that I no longer believe in any God or supernatural phenomenon. Another person said, my experience in the Adventist church has been brainwashing. I've endured this brainwashing and it has marred my view of God. They're finding cognitive dissonance between the Adventist beliefs and what they consider their rational beliefs. Like, it's the idea that there are just logic holes. This is stupid and you can't fix stupid. People are saying, I see these logical holes and I believe there's no room for questioning. We are fundamentally misunderstood, one young person says. And I think that I need some answers. I believe the Adventist church misuses the Bible and denies science. Another young person said, I see conspiracies in the church. Another one said, it's highly unlikely that I'll return. Maybe if the church embraced science more thoroughly, it would help. And so others were saying, why is it that we have a woman leader in Ellen White, but we're afraid to allow women to minister? Just questions. It doesn't make logical sense to some of these young adults. And so in a prior study that we had done, this was 2014, we had looked at Adventist doctrines and what young adults' agreements was with Adventist doctrines, and we found they were pretty much in agreement with creation and salvation, and even that the Ten Commandments still applied today, and the Sabbath and the Trinity. But where there was disagreement was on things like the Adventist church is the last day remnant church, that you need to marry somebody in the faith, that 1844 and the pre-Advent judgment was biblical, that the pre-Advent judgment defined who God was, Ellen White and the gift of prophecy. There were some fundamental disagreements with these doctrines. And have we done a good job of explaining these things? Have we helped young adults to rationally process their faith? Now, it's very interesting. Barna did a study on Adventist millennials, and they compared that with a study that they had done on Christian millennials. And they discovered with Christian millennials, for instance, that there were 6 areas that Christian millennials had problems with religion. They said, for instance, religion is intolerant of doubt, that it's exclusive, it's anti-science, it's overprotective, it's shallow, it's repressive. And by Christian religion, they meant their Christian faith. And then they compared this with how Adventists responded to questions on these things about the Adventist church. And here was the shocking result. On every category, Adventist millennials saw their church in more negative light than did Christian millennials. They said it is intolerant of doubt. It was almost 3 times higher than what it was for Christian millennials. They said it was exclusive. They said it was anti-science. Every single category, the Adventist millennials rated the Adventist church worse than the Christian millennials rated their Christian church. Well, that's shocking. That shows us we need to do something to make our beliefs not only understandable, but to encourage dialogue, to encourage thoughtful thinking about what does this mean? How do I understand this? How do I relate to this? Does this make logical sense? My wife has written a series of books that is intended for young people, and it starts with family worship. And so she's written these books trying to show how Adventist doctrines can be relevant to their life. And here's something that she believes. Doctrines need to be experienced rather than just understood. In this day and age, we need to not only make logical sense, but we need to understand how those doctrines relate to our lives. So she wrote a book on the sanctuary that didn't deal with where all the pieces of the furniture go, but instead, how does the sanctuary doctrine make a practical difference in my life? So the first gap we're going to have to deal with is this rational gap. Can we make sense of the doctrines? The second gap we're going to have to deal with is the authenticity gap, that we find young adults are saying, this really just doesn't make sense in my life because the people I'm watching, they are not authentic. They don't have integrity. Here's a quote that came in from the survey. Part of what led me to questioning in the first place was that there was so much hypocrisy in the church. Also that many members held very troubling and unethical beliefs. Another person said, not everyone who stops attending disbelieves Adventist theology or got hurt. We may just find the denomination increasingly too small. Now, the way we fix authenticity is by having true identity, by knowing who we really are. We're not just cultural Adventists, but we know that God loves us, and we are determined to be God's loving representatives to others. We know truth not just as a concept, but as something that transforms our lives. This is what a young person said: after leaving the church, I don't see I could go back. I feel like my beliefs are too different and would not fit into the mold. And they said, the only way I could see myself coming back is if I forced myself to conform to what the Adventist church wants me to be. Being conformed instead of catching a faith that's contagious. See the challenge there? Barna, in their study on millennials, also said this: one of the recurrent themes of this research, seen here as well as in the discussion groups, is that while Adventists seem to place great importance on outward behavior, such behavior is a poor indicator of their relationship with Christ. In other words, outward behavior didn't indicate whether they were having an internal experience. Time and again, Barna says, we heard from young adults who are deepening their relationship with Christ and people in the church during a time when their outward behaviors are not in conformity to the church. So they are actually growing closer to Jesus, but their behaviors don't represent that. In many cases, they conclude, they will later become further committed to the lifestyle doctrines, standards of Adventist doctrine, but only after internalizing them rather than conforming to them. What we need to do is teach a faith that is internal rather than a faith that is external, a faith that is not based on outward behaviors, but a faith that is based on an inward relationship with Jesus Christ. Third gap, compassion. What I heard from a lot of people in the surveys, we just don't seem to care. Oh, SDAs say that they love people, one person said, but what you find is they judge people and they find texts that justify that judgment and call it love. Others mentioned hurt from the church, burnout, religious trauma. One person said, I'm gay. Another said, I'm lesbian. They said, the church hates me. The church doesn't care about me. We have a compassion gap. Does the church care? One young person said, I went to church. They were very interested in my becoming part of the church. I participated, but then I burnt out. And when I burnt out, nobody cared. They only seemed to be interested in filling up positions with someone who would do everything. Do we care about the young adults in our church? Barna says, despite being digital natives, relational connection is lacking for most young adults. This is the most connected generation and the most lonely generation. So what do you think would bring young people back? What do you think would help them to come back to the church? Well, what I discovered in my survey was so surprising. I said, if you were open to coming back to the church, what would enable you to come back? And you know what they said? If the church cared about social issues. That was shocking. I didn't expect that. That the number one reason why they would come back if they felt the church cared, and if they were less proud, and if they were confident that God was leading. So I think we need to think about how we can effectively reach them and help them to care. Fourth gap, the engagement gap. In the engagement gap, this means that a lot of people are finding like there's not a place for them to get involved in the church. You know, we have adventurers, we have pathfinders, we have AY, but then what? Nothing. One person said, my name was taken off the books because I hadn't contacted the local church. No one bothered to find me. No one tried to see if I could use prayer or some help. In our area, another person said, Adventism is very much catch and release. Was that how we want it to be? Barna study said, one of the strengths of the Adventist church is that they have many opportunities for children and youth to be involved. But there's a difficult transition from child to adult. Young adults have fewer opportunities. As one person in our post-college discussion group said, if you aren't a child and don't have a child, there's nothing for you. So we've talked about a lot of gaps. Do you remember what they are? We need to be willing to become authentic. We need to teach our identity. We need to help people have a place to process their doubts, to make their faith rational. We need to care for youth in the community and especially show understanding of social issues that they care about. and we need to engage young people. We need to engage young adults in the church so that they have a place to make a difference. Are you willing to be committed to helping young adults become the bright future of the church that they already are? Are you willing to make a difference in their lives by mentoring them, by connecting with them, by helping them to process their doubts, by showing them that you care? If we do this, I believe that the future is bright, but the door is closing. The gap is there. Are we willing to step into the gap and to help young adults become the incredible future and present of the church?